morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. On behalf of the Center for Urban Language Teaching and Research at Georgia State University, I welcome you to the 8th Annual World Languages Week. CULTR, as the center is known, is one of 16 federally funded Title VI language resource centers in the United States. CULTR has created a unique identity around serving the needs of all students and the communities they represent by helping to promote language learning opportunities as part of 21st century global education. Guided by its core values of access, advocacy, outreach, and research, CULTR has gained a national reputation for innovative approaches to promoting access to language education for all students, regardless of their socioeconomic and ethnic background. I am Jennie Burnet, Associate Professor of Anthropology and Director of the Institute for Women's Gender and Sexuality Studies at Georgia State University. And I'd like to thank you for being here with us today for the Nonprofit and Community Organizations panel, which I will be moderating. Before introducing the panelists, I'd like to address a couple of housekeeping and technical questions. First, I would like to remind everyone that all panels this week are being recorded and will be available after the event. All attendees will remain muted throughout the entire session. Our panel discussion of approximately 35 to 40 minutes will be followed by Q&A with you, the attendees. Students may submit questions throughout the course of the discussion and after in the Q&A box by clicking on the Q&A icon at the bottom of the screen. If you like questions you see, click the thumbs up icon to promote this question to the top of the list. The CULTR team will enter resource links for you in the chat. So thank you for using the Q&A for your questions. Now, let's meet the panelists. First, I'd like to introduce Dana Salter, Director of Continuing Education and Community Engagement for Create Teacher Residency at Georgia State University. Thank you for being here today, Dana.
Pleasure. I'm happy to be here.
Next, I'd like to introduce Jongdae Kim, Executive Director of the Regeneration Movement. He's joining us today from South Korea. Thank you for being with us today. And next, I'd like to introduce Molly Rosa, Coordinator of Volunteers for Caritas der Estudiantes Hilfe in Notz. And she is joining us today from Vienna, Austria. Welcome, Molly.
Hi, everybody.
So without further ado, let's go ahead and plunge into our questions. So to begin, I'd like to ask each panelist to briefly describe the places you've lived, worked, and studied, and how you developed your various language skills. And Dana, I'd like to ask you to start.
Sure. Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. I have lived, when I saw this question, I thought, oh boy, okay, I've lived in South Korea, lived in Turkey, some time in Perth, Australia, Thailand, Singapore, a little bit of Malaysia, popped on over to India, and then headed over to Montreal, Canada, and then back to the United States. And while in Canada, I lived with the Naskapi community in Kawawa, Chickamack up North Quebec. The other part of that question is how I developed language skills was, for me, I got started in high school with Spanish. That was middle school, high school, where I was like, I like this. Started talking more and more with my Spanish teacher. And once I got to college, I kept taking more classes, but also surrounding myself, getting into all these different clubs, meeting people, reaching out to people. And then once I left the country, just being there. Like I landed in Korea, I couldn't say anything. I got hungry. You learn how to talk when you're hungry. So I really got into the community and started hanging out and having a good time. So that's how I did language skills.
Great. Thank you for sharing that. Let's move on to Jongdae Kim.
Yeah, so I've been to many different places as well around the globe, but I guess the main two places that I lived throughout my life are in Korea and in the United States. So currently I'm 35 years old, and I think I've roughly spent about half of those years in South Korea and another half in the United States. By the way, I'm a dual citizen, so I carry two passports, South Korean and US passport, because I was born in the US because my grandfather then was a political refugee from South Korea. So US became a temporary safe haven for my family. So that is why I was born in the US. But soon after I was born, my family moved back to Korea. So Korea is where I grew up and until when I was about 14. And that is when me and my brother started studying abroad in the US and Canada for education, among many other reasons. So I guess in terms of language skills, Korean is my first language, and English is kind of like my second language. It doesn't really quite feel like, I'm native to English, but I guess, yeah, I think in terms of language learning, I feel like language learning is more about kind of embracing culture rather than, learning a skill set. Because, I say this because I think, so I had to serve in the Korean military, and I think that is when, my Korean identity and language skills really got me grounded. Because, in high school, I was, all of my friends were American friends, like white friends and Black friends and Asian American friends. So I was, mostly in that American culture, and that is who I hung out with. But then I went to the Korean military after sophomore year in college, and I think that's when my Korean identity really like got me grounded. And then, when I came back, I was hanging out more with my Korean friends. So yeah, but yeah, I think it's more about embracing culture. Yeah.
Great. Thank you for sharing that, John Dye. Molly, would you like to share your experiences with us, please?
I'd love to. Excuse me. I started out by learning Spanish when I was high school age. One of my sisters is adopted from Nicaragua, so we spoke some Spanish at home. And then when I was in community college, I studied abroad in Florence, Italy, and took intensive Italian classes. Then after that, I was an au pair in Spain for a couple months to really deepen my Spanish by immersion. And then I ended up working as a kindergarten teaching assistant for a year in Austria. I took a year-long leave of absence between my junior and senior year of college to do that. I started learning, just to backtrack a little bit, I started learning German in my junior year of college when I moved to Atlanta from California. So then I moved back to Austria with a Fulbright scholarship in 2009, and I've stayed pretty much ever since. So German is my main second language, and I can still get by in Spanish and perform basic bodily functions in Italian if I'm in Italy. So.
Great. Thank you for sharing, Molly. It's wonderful to hear all of your diverse experiences and all the various places you've lived and worked over the years. Let's see. Let's move on to our next question. I'd like for each of you to share us, what is one of the most valuable lessons that you've learned over the course of your career? And this time we'll go in reverse order, starting with Molly Rosa.
I think one of the most valuable lessons I learned is to be flexible and to think about what transferable skills you have. So I worked in international education for like 9 years. I worked for the Fulbright Commission for 7 years here in Austria as a student advisor and the program officer for the U.S. Student Fulbright Program in Austria. And when I started thinking about going for a new challenge, I realized that I had a lot of skills aimed towards helping people adapt to living in Austria and navigating bureaucracy and all these kinds of things. And I realized that those skills were really helpful in a different context, namely helping refugees. So I sort of took a sidestep out of international education and into refugee assistance by thinking about transferable skills.
Great. Thank you for sharing that. Now we'll move on to John Dye.
All right, so this is a big question, so I'll try my stab, but yeah, I think first I'll probably need to explain about what I do in terms of my work. So I run a nonprofit called Regeneration Movement. It is a small community-based organization based off of Clarkston, Georgia. Some of you may know, but Clarkston is known for its population, which is predominantly have backgrounds as resettled refugees to the United States. So at Regeneration Movement, we work with students who mostly have backgrounds as resettled refugees or immigrants, and our mission is to empower them as global citizens and peace builders through their diverse identities. So I would say one of the most valuable lessons that I learned over the course of my career is that embracing the diverse identities within yourself and being able to process that and integrate them well can be such an asset in today's world. And that was a conviction when I started this work about 5 years ago, and it's only gotten stronger ever since then. And some of you here may not consider your background as global or diverse per se, but I'm speaking more in terms of attitude, and I think being able to see the world from many different angles, like Molly was saying earlier, being flexible with a broad set of lens, I think is the key to making changes and building peace in today's world, because we are living in ever more globalizing and pluralizing world, and having that diverse identity and set of lens within yourself, that really helps. And I just want to give you a very short example. So there is a student that studied with me at Regen. Her background is she comes from a Chin ethnicity, which is a minority tribe in Myanmar. And she came to the US when she was in elementary school, and she studied with us, and she's now in college. But because of that, she has a heart for her hometown of Myanmar. And some of you may know that there was a coup d'etat in Myanmar last year, and since then there has been democracy movement that's been going on. So our students have been an advocate to her US colleagues and friends, letting them know about the situation in Myanmar. And at the same time, currently she volunteers for the students in Myanmar who cannot receive education because of the situation. So she logs in online and teaches them English, as well as some GED education in their spare time because of her heart for Myanmar. So that is one example from our student. But yeah, I think it's being able to really integrate your diverse identity well is such an asset in today's world.
Great. Thank you so much for sharing a story from one of your clients or organization members. Dana, please, I'll pass it to you.
Sure. I'm sitting here listening like, oh my God, this is so good. I would say what I learned early on that was been really helpful is that, so my field is education. So I started out as an educator, teacher, and now I teach teachers here in Atlanta, support the teaching of teachers. And one of the biggest things I learned from my mentor when I was, just starting out is education begins with relationships. Anything that we do tends to begin with a relationship. And so just like Molly and Jande were saying, I was living from Chicago, lived in Jersey and all that. Even though I hadn't traveled overseas till I got grown, thinking about the relationships I had with my friends just every day in high school. We all come from such a different background, even though we're all right here, right? There's no one way of being. So taking that time and saying, I hang out with my friends, but what's the other side that I don't know about them? I found out my friends were connected all around the world, all around the United States, things I hadn't even thought about from this person I sit right next to every day when I was in school. And then when I left the country, I took that with me, and I kind of have the attitude, I never meet a stranger. We just didn't know each other until this moment. I never got lost. I mean, I was lost plenty of times overseas, but someone always helped me. I would end up in a rice field in Korea, having dinner with people where we're trying, they're trying to understand me, I'm trying to understand them. I'm in, India, ended up in a club downtown, hanging out, talking to people. And then I was in a school the next day teaching the club owners' kid. It was just relationships, relationships, relationships. And how do we grow them, connect with them, and then foster them? That's what I take with me. So I'm back here in the United States, haven't been out in a few years. COVID kept us here. We had a little one, but now we're teaching our child, 4 years old, in your classroom. Who are your friends? What do they do? What are their traditions? Why do they talk? What do they think about? Education, relationships. That's the biggest thing I take.
Great. Thank you so much. It's so inspiring to hear from all of you. I'm really enjoying this conversation today. So moving on to our next question, and here is another opportunity for you to share personal or professional anecdotes. So please tell us a personal or professional anecdote where your language skills or your difficulties in communicating helped you connect with other people. And this time we'll start with Jong Dai.
All right, sure, I will start. So as I was saying, I was the type of person who was always kind of struggling with my kind of dual or multiple identities, and how to make peace within myself with this diverse identity within myself. So but one thing that I discovered that because I've lived so much in Korea, and I'm very familiar with the Korean culture, and because I'm very familiar with the American culture, I can be the bridge when it's necessary. And it was 2018 when in South Korea there was a sudden influx of Yemeni refugees because of the ongoing Yemen war. And there were refugees who first went to Malaysia, and then came to Jeju Island, because Jeju Island was one of the places where they don't really need a visa to enter. So Yemeni refugees, about 500 of them, came to the island and landed there, and they were seeking asylum. But it caused such a ruffle in South Korea, because unlike America, South Korea has mostly been a homogenous country, and they tend not to deal very well with other people coming in, or I hate to say this, but there is that problem of not being able to, and they're just a fear of refugees was very predominant. And I'm also a Christian, but it was happening mostly in church, because because many of the Yemeni refugees were Muslims, and there was largely just unfounded fear, ungrounded fear against Muslims from Christian churches. So I was seeing, and my work being with the refugees, I was thinking of ways maybe I could be a help in this kind of situation. And then I was looking for books related to refugees in Korea, but like there was none. Currently, I think about 4 years has passed since then, and many more books and information have been published, but back then there was like probably non-existent. So I knew of a very good book which I read well, and it was a short book, and it gave a introduction about refugees, and also written in Christian perspective of how Christians should view this crisis that's going on in the world. So I translated that into Korean, and then I introduced that to the Korean society. So that's one thing that I did with the language skills that I have.
Great. Thank you, Jong Dai. Molly, if you could take the floor now.
Sure. So I started working in a home for refugees about a year ago for Caritas, which is it's a Catholic NGO, but it's not very Catholic. So I started working there about a year ago, and then the war in Ukraine broke out in the end of February. And the house that I worked in, which housed about up to 120 people and had about 100 people at the time. Now it has more than 120, I think. we started seeing refugees from Ukraine immediately. Austria is not that far from Ukraine, so people were taking the train and arriving in Vienna. And one evening, I was doing my administrative work in the house, signing people up for things and making sure they got their support payments and things like that. And one of the new Ukrainian arrivals came up to me. Now, I don't speak any Russian or Ukrainian, and she didn't speak any English or German. But we just looked at each other for a second and smiled. And then she broke out in Spanish and just said, like, good evening, hello. And I was like, oh, I actually speak that. We can communicate. So there was this opportunity to communicate with a person who I thought that I had no basis of communication with. But due to a language that I had learned years ago that's very, very rusty, I was able to have a conversation with this person and help her out. So that meant a lot to me, and was also just a really funny, surreal experience for me.
That's great. Thank you so much for sharing, Molly. And Dana.
Yeah, I think this was a question I was trying to think of an appropriate moment to say. I've had lots of mistakes with when I pronunciation, but I think the one that really stands out to me was when I lived in South Korea. I lived in a town called Daejeon, and while I was there is a boys detention center there, like a juvenile jail there. And while I was there, through a long series of events, I got connected to someone who was doing work there, and they needed some support with some translation into English and some support. And I said, well, my Korean is, at that time, it was really, I could do some things. And so I said, whatever I can do, I can help. Well, it turned out through conversations, meeting the boys, meeting the president of the person who was running the jail, connecting to the university, we were able to create this program that helped the boys in the detention center, the jail, juvenile detention center, to get some courses that we could teach there with them with English and some writing skills. And then when some of them were 18, they could come to the university I was teaching at. So we created this pathway program with the community. It was this really great moment that organically grew out of connecting with the community organization through me doing some really rudimentary basic translation skill, some translation work. So that for me was a great moment of, even though I'm not a fluent in the language, I was able to use some skills to translate and then support a nonprofit community organization to connect, to support the community. So that was great.
Great. So many wonderful, inspiring stories. So what advice would you give to students who wish to pursue a career in nonprofit and community organizations? What tangible steps can students take while still in school to better position themselves to land their first job in this kind of work? And let's go to Dana with that question first.
Yes, I was thinking a lot about that too, and trying to remember myself when I was, 12, 15, 18, getting started and thinking about things. I think if I could go back with what I know now to when I was 14, 15, 18, I would say, take some time and get to know organizations in your community. You don't have to necessarily get started, jump in. You can just start building relationships, having conversations, looking at what the organization does and what you like to do. Is there any place to volunteer to get started to see? But just really, find out, take some time with you. What do you like? What are you interested in? What skills and approaches, ways of thinking, really, you hold dear and you enjoy it. Looking at different local nonprofits and organizations, there's all sorts of ways to find them. And then just having some conversations to get started. I didn't do that when I was in high school. I didn't know to do that. I do it as I got older. And I think if I had that, that would be a good way to get started for me.
Great, thank you. We'll pass it to John Dye.
Great. I guess my advice, who's pushing for a career path of nonprofit work is that maybe um, hone in on your business skills in terms of, finance or operations or management skills, because I think nonprofit is where, a lot of idealists come with, very pure heart and, passion, like, and so they come in. But I've seen some friends who, go into nonprofits and, they get disappointed by seeing how the organizations are run, how, but nonprofits, before their mission, it should be run, it is just like another, any other organization, any other, business organization. So there are, administrative things that go into it, and operations skills that need to go into it. But I guess I see in the industry that, maybe that's the area where, more, business minded people can come in and run the organization. So I think, yeah, uh, just being honest about your passion and building your passion, and on top of that, also honing on your business skills is, I think it will be crucial in terms of looking for, in terms of, your career path. And I guess my another advice would be just, stay open, be exposed to many different things as much as possible. I think, I don't know the age group, maybe high school or college age, but, I think that age group is, a perfect time for you to explore as much as you can. So just do that in your own environment and just explore a lot.
Great, thank you. And now Molly.
Well, I'm really biased because I'm a coordinator of volunteers. So my number one piece of advice is to get out and volunteer. It's a really good way to get to know organizations and to find out if you like the work that they're doing. And there are all different kinds of volunteer roles that utilize all different kinds of skills. So, I mean, in the Center for Ukrainian Refugees where I work, we have everything from people who are helping out at the buffet and cutting up strudel and making coffee for people, to volunteer translators who are mostly Ukrainians themselves, who volunteer to help their compatriots by translating. And I myself realized how much I loved helping refugees by volunteering in 2015 when there was the big refugee wave here. That's how I got familiar with the refugee house that I later ended up working in. So I think volunteering is a really good way to get your feet wet, but it's also a really good way to make connections and to meet people within organizations.
Great, thank you. Although I'm the moderator, I'll just throw in my 2 cents on this question as well. One thing, I totally agree, volunteering is a really great opportunity, and getting to know what you like and what kinds of work environments you like to be in. Do you like to sit at a desk all day? Do you like to be on your feet? Do you like to talk to people? Do you like, what kind of work environment you like? And I know for me, landing my first job after college, what made the huge difference for me was my roles in student organizations, both in high school and a college student, because I allowed me to show on my resume that I knew how to plan events, that I knew how to do publicity for events, and a wide variety of other things. And I published an op-ed in the student newspaper as an undergrad, and I could give that as an example of my writing skills. And so just figuring out what you're good at, working on things that you need to know more about, and then learning how to package that and present it to a potential employer are all really helpful. So to wrap up this part, I just want to give each panelist an opportunity to share anything about themselves, their lives, their career paths that they haven't had a chance to share yet, that might inspire this audience or teach them something. And we'll go back to the reverse order of the panelists again. So Molly, if you could go first.
Yeah, I think I'd like to just go back to kind of what I said at the beginning. I guess you probably heard my path to living abroad in Europe was not the most straightforward one. And I didn't have a lot of money available to take advantage of traditional study abroad opportunities. So that's why I studied abroad when I was in community college, because it was much cheaper. And that's why I went abroad as an au pair. I went abroad as a kindergarten teacher. Um, I I found work abroad. I spent a summer in Italy woofing, which is working on organic farms for free, um, for in exchange for room and board. There are, I think there are a lot of opportunities out there. They're not necessarily free, but if you can scrape together the money for the flight, a lot of times you can find a way to support yourself abroad on a meager salary, and get to experience life in another culture and build your language skills and just have this really rich cultural experience. So I think, once again, I'd say be creative. And if you don't have a lot of resources at your disposal, look into programs like that.
Great. Thank you so much, Jong Dai.
Yeah, maybe I'm piggybacking off from some of the points that have been made today through our discussion. But yeah, I think just finding your passion or finding what you really like, it comes a lot from, knowing who you are, but that doesn't just come from introspection. It comes from, getting to experience, getting on your feet and, meeting different people and being involved in those relationships. I think those are also the chances which can tell you, who you are. And, it can't just happen within your bubble. So that's why I was, encouraging you to kind of explore. And as Molly said, just volunteer a lot. There are always opportunities. I think in the chat, there are just list of, different organizations that you can be involved in. So just continue exploring and, just, throw yourself to new environments and, you'll probably be surprised by, finding, new things about yourself that way. So yeah, that's what I want to say.
Great. Thank you. And Dana. Oh, you're muted.
Wow. All these years into this and I'm still muted. What Molly and Junde said about, and you too, Jenny, about the passion, building relationships, connecting. And I would say one of the things that when I was trying to figure out what I want to do, and I'm still trying to figure it out, I think it's an ongoing journey and process, things I want to do, try out. We're trying to figure out how to go and move with our daughter now to another country and live, trying to figure all this out. But don't let anything, your geographic location, where you are, your community, who you are, there are ways to connect to other cultures right where you are, right in your community. There's festivals, there's events, you got Georgia State University right here. There's a ton of stuff happening all the time where you can pop in and just start to meet people from around the world right here and get started with those relationships. Briefly, I'll say, when I was telling people back, I left the country at 21, just hopped on, out, build a relationship, got a job, and I landed in South Korea. But when I was telling people oh, you're going by yourself, you're a woman traveling by yourself, you're a Black woman traveling by yourself, oh my God, you don't know the language. If I kept listening to all that, I would never have gone, right? I had to say, okay, yep, there's lots of things. Let me go and figure it out. Let me learn. And then while I was there, you get in these places, you get in your countries, you here, wherever you are, let yourself come out as well. I joined a band when I was in South Korea, right? I was a drummer. We were traveling around, having a good time, singing, got to go to the Philippines, all sorts of things, from popping over to another country and trying new things out. So that's what I would say too. I'm a teacher, I'm an educator here in Atlanta. We're training teachers. We're working with middle and high school students who might be interested in being teachers. Well, as a teacher, having those experiences, I come back in the classroom. Now my students are getting connected, etc. So that's one thing I would say. Just try. Just try.
Great. Thank you so much. I did go, that was all three of you. Okay. Just a reminder, now's the time for questions from attendees. You can put those in the Q&A box. Also, any panelists, while we wait for questions from the audience, do any panelists have questions for others on the panel?
I guess since you guys have all experienced, living abroad, maybe aside from language barriers or, I think we've talked about that a little bit in the beginning, but, what were some of the challenges that you had to face or, yeah. What was the most important or most difficult thing getting used to another or adapting to another culture?
Right, I'll go ahead and jump in, even though I'm not a panelist. I would have to say, I've lived in Mexico, I've lived in France, I've lived in Rwanda and Africa and all over the United States, and I've visited many, many other countries. But I have to say, when I've been abroad for long term, like a year or so, the thing that I began to miss the most was food. One of the amazing things about the United States these days, not when I was growing up, but now, is like you can eat any kind of food you want at any moment. And I can say, for instance, when I was living in Rwanda, there were limited opportunities to eat things outside of Rwandan food, which I do love Rwandan food, but after a while, I just wanted something that tasted different or tasted like home or those kinds of things. So for me, that was one of my challenges.
On a similar note, I remember when I studied abroad in Italy, and it was my first experience abroad, and I was 19, just turned 19. I used to, when I got really homesick and felt culture shocky, I would go to a Chinese restaurant because Chinese restaurants have a lot in common all across the world. And I would be like, yes, this is as the world is supposed to be. I think the toughest thing though for me about living abroad is missing my family. It's always going to be a challenge, I think. And if you're lucky, your family scrapes together the resources and can come visit you. And I'm lucky because I live in Europe and I have 5 weeks of paid vacation. So I tell my family, even though I'm far away, the fact that I can come for 2 weeks over Christmas is a luxury that I probably wouldn't have if I lived on the other side of the United States. So there are ways to get around it, but missing family is a big one for me.
Yeah, both of those were the two. Let me try to think of something else. I think another challenge on top of the food, especially after about that 6 to 8 month mark with the food and with the family, it was holidays. Holidays are my jam. And so that's such an old thing to say, but I love it. And yeah, sometimes I did get 5 weeks also, but then I was torn. Like, do I go to Australia? Because it's right there, or do I fly all the way, so what a terrible, thing to make. But I think the other thing for me that was a challenge was when it was time for me to move to another country or do something with a country where I didn't have relationships there already, contracts, visas, all of that work, I had to really rely on people that I didn't know. And I'm like, I can't read this. What am I signing? And, so that for me was a challenge when I live overseas. How about you?
Yeah, John, did I answer your question?
Yeah, I'm trying to, I was just enjoying listening to your experiences, but, surprisingly, food hasn't been much of an issue for me because, some of my friends call me like I'm not Korean because, I'm one of those very, very few Koreans that don't eat kimchi, because Koreans, like, they need kimchi like on whatever they eat, but like I'm fine without kimchi. So I think that's probably one of the reasons I could do well in the United States, although I left at the early age. But same thing, family, all of our family live in Korea. In fact, that is one of the reasons why I am currently in Korea. We just had our newborn son about 5 months ago.
Oh,
so
congratulations!
Yes,
congratulations!
yeah. So my wife and I are currently in Korea, and we have the family support here, which is very, very great. So yeah, I think family is has been also the most difficult thing for me living in the US.
That's great, Jungdae. I'm so happy you were able to bring your child to meet the family. I know my husband is originally from Rwanda, and part of the hardest thing for us is it's just so expensive to bring the whole family. And so I feel for my mother-in-law because she hasn't been able to have a close relationship with our children, and our children not with her. They've only seen her a couple times in their lives, and it's one of the toughest things, I think. So we have a question now in the Q&A from the audience. So what are the most challenging things to run or lead a nonprofit community organization? Who'd like to jump in first?
I'll pop in very quickly. It really builds on what John Day was saying about the business side. Spot on with what you're saying. With we get a lot of really, really passionate people who really want to do a lot of great things, but there are budgets. You have to write grants. You have to get funded. You have to, understand the tax codes. You have to think through all of those types of business and nonprofit management skills and have them to run it. Because if not, we see a lot of places that you come in and really passionate people, but you don't have, you're not understanding your income for folks who are on payroll. I mean, just so many details that can then impact how your mission and vision resonates in the community, right? Like, yeah, they're nice, but you never know what's going to happen. So that for me is what I've experienced. And what I do is come in and help nonprofits as well with that part, getting that part up and running.
I think sorry, if I can jump in. I think one of the most challenging things is not that I run or lead a nonprofit, but in my role in a nonprofit community organization is it all sounds really nice and fluffy and fuzzy to be helping people. And it does feel really good and it's really rewarding and it means a lot to me. But also, like sometimes you see people at their worst because you're seeing people in really, really stressful situations. So somebody once told me, like, if you want to help happy people, become a cruise director. If you want to help people who really, really need help, be ready for it to be a little bit challenging at times.
Agreeing with everything that Dana and Molly said, and especially as I have been leading a small community-based nonprofit for over 5 years. One thing that small community-based organization lacks is maybe the funding and also the people to run it. So me and my wife have been kind of doing all sorts of different admin stuff over the years, and when I was talking about those things, I was actually talking to myself because those things were it's really challenging for you to be thinking about your mission and doing the right thing, running the right program, but at the same time you need to meet the funders, you need to fundraise, and you need to write grants and everything. You have to do and you also have to do tax, and you have to pay your employees and pay your staff. So I guess running an organization is not just about the mission, and in order to for the mission to shine well, you have to have the firm foundation, which is the admin, and that is so crucial in the work of nonprofit. And yeah, I think that's also very challenging, but very crucial.
Yeah, I'll just reinforce something that was a theme in all three answers is I have found that working in nonprofits, and particularly those that are helping people in great need, is the risk of burnout for staff and for leadership, because often when it's 5 o'clock, it's really hard to feel like you can step away when someone's needs might go unmet. And yet learning how to maintain those boundaries so that you can support your own health, connect with your family, and enjoy your own life so that you can do the hard work is really fundamental to being successful in the long run in a career in not-for-profits and community organizations. Great. Let's see. I don't have any more questions right now in the Q&A. Oh, I do. Okay. What do you do to promote your organization? Who'd like to jump in first? All right, I'm going to call on Molly to start.
Well, I was trying to think about this question because I don't actually do that much promotion or volunteer recruitment. Most of the recruitment happens in like a different office, and I get the people. So the big challenge, or my big part of the challenge, is to retain the people who come in and are interested. So I think recruitment is super important, and getting people through the door is the first step. But I think a really important piece of the puzzle is taking somebody who maybe just signed up for one 4-hour-long volunteer shift one day because they're curious about what's going on and they've been reading a lot about Ukraine in the news and they want to feel helpful, and turning that person into an integral part of the volunteer team of my organization is one of the most rewarding and challenging and important parts of my job. So I think I read somewhere that every time a volunteer comes in, you're either giving them a reason to stay or a reason to go. And I think just being really intentional and thoughtful about every interaction and thinking about people's emotional needs and also just practical needs and how you make sure people feel oriented and settled in is key to turning somebody from a one-off volunteer to a regular member of the community.
Great insight, great insight. Jong Dai, how do you promote your organization?
That's also a very good question that I need to answer. Probably need to come up with, but yeah, for me, you know, I haven't been as much focused on the promotion part of our organization in the past, but I feel like it's also very necessary for, you know, the sustainability of our organization, because, you know, we do, like, I have been more focused on, you know, I guess what do you call it, integrity of, you know, our programs, and I wanted to be really more true to the mission that I'm doing. So, you know, I've been maybe too buried in that, you know, that I forget about, you know. So like all the great things are happening inside, but like if nobody knows about what's going inside, you know, how are you gonna, you know, how are the funds gonna come, and how are you gonna invite other people into this mission? Because nonprofit work is not about yourself just doing all these great things. It's about, you know, you being there and inviting more people to join the cause and join the mission. So yeah, I think promotion is very important, but yeah, I've also been very careful about the dignity of our students, or maybe too scared in some sense that, you know, because I really would hate to just, you know, put my students' faces, you know, on the promotion for the sake of it. So I always wanted to be careful, but maybe I've been just too careful in the past. So, and our students have been very happy to be the ambassadors for a region. So in the past, for all of our students would bring another friend. So it's been kind of been the word of mouth in the community. And yeah, whenever I have a chance to speak, you know, in Korea or in America, you know, I always talk about our work of region and spread the word about what we do.
Great, thank you, Dana.
Yeah, this is so good to hear, and a great question, because we're grappling with that right now. So a teacher preparation program, right? We all see the news. No, it looks like nobody wants to teach, right? And people are leaving teaching. And, you know, to the young people, you know, everyone on this event webinar, how many of you are thinking about being teachers, right? I mean, I can't see hands, but not a lot of people, I'm assuming, but that's what we're seeing with the market research. And so one of the things we're thinking about, like, while we are at Georgia State is a nonprofit, believe it or not. And while we're here, we can work with the PR marketing communications department. And we need to really, we're looking internally, what are the stories to help promote what we are talking about, to both what, again, Molly and John Day said, everyone in this webinar, have you had a teacher in your life that really, they connected with you, right? You connected with them. Was it someone in an after school program? Was there somebody in your life who was, an educator in that role? We need to help tell those stories so that people can see themselves in this place. And I think that is a thread that goes across our organizations, telling the stories so you can see yourself here and how you can do that work and it ripples out. That's what we're trying to figure out right now. And it doesn't want to sound fake, right? Me on TikTok is fake. Right? Like, oh, come be a teacher. How do we authentically tell these stories? That's what we're trying to figure out.
That's great. Thank you, everyone. So I'm not seeing any questions in the Q&A, but we have about 5 minutes. I'd like to offer each panelist just another chance to add anything, wrap up, share something you think is really important with this audience. And let's start with Dana.
I think it was first an honor to be on this panel today and to hear from Molly and John Day and Jennie, and just things to be thinking about. I think the only thing I would end with is reiterating what all of us have been saying is, take a moment when you get time, take some time and just think about who you are and the work that you want to do in this world. It doesn't need to be one thing. It can be several different things, but who are you? Who are you now? Who do you want to be? Who are you becoming? And how does that connect to the work that you would like to do in this world? And then looking for organizations right in your neighborhood. You might not even realize they're there, that you can just call, email, chat, whatever, and say, hey, can we just have a conversation to get that started?
Great. Thank you, John Day.
Yeah, so maybe on a similar note, I just was reading a reflection of one of our participants to an event that happened last week. So we had a session called Story Exchange at Regeneration Movement. So it's in partnership with Narrative 4. So the format is very simple. You come to the space and then you get paired up with one another. There's a prompt to tell each other, and you tell your story to one another, and in the end we come together as a group, and then each person tells another person's story in first person. So I'll be like, oh, so my name is Dana and I would like to tell my story, so as if I'm Dana. So it's a very simple exercise, but it's such a powerful experience. And so it was so powerful that one of our participants was compelled to write a reflection on it, and she shared it with me. But one of the things she said really kind of touched me is that I came here not expecting much, and I didn't know what I could offer. I was nervous, but I realized that there's something that we all can offer at the table if we just be there. So just I think sometimes being prepared and yourself, your presence, just being there, it already contributes to the environment that you're surrounding. So always remember that, like Dana said, you all have unique things and talents already inside that you probably don't even realize. But even whether you realize it or not, you all have something to contribute, and you are already doing it without yourself realizing it. So yeah.
Molly, your turn.
I think the number one piece of advice I'd like to give students is try to give yourself time to pursue things that feed your soul, even if they don't necessarily seem that practical. Um, Going abroad is almost without exception a life-changing experience. You'll learn so much about yourself, especially if you're in somewhere where you have to speak another language. You learn so much about yourself and so much about the world, and you'll make amazing new friends, and you'll have relationships and experiences that there's no way you could have reproduced if you just stayed at home. And it'll be hard, but it's really rewarding, and it's something that you'll carry with you for the rest of your life. So I know that it's really hard sometimes to take time out of some sort of established path. It's like, okay, I'm going to high school, high school, high school, high school. Okay, now college, 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 college. Do your extracurricular activities, do your school's work, everything. But really, if you can try to carve out moments when you can go abroad and create these memories and create new experiences, I think it's almost always going to be worth it. So again, just try to be creative and think about what skills you have to offer and what you can bring to the table to create experiences overseas that are within your reach. And I think that there's a lot more within your reach than you might think.
Great. Thank you all for those really inspiring words. And just to amplify a bit some of the messages I heard, I just want to encourage all of the young people here to, we've all been through a really tough time the last several years. The world has been a really hard place to be in. And to take some time to imagine the world in which you'd like to live. And don't take on the full responsibility of making that world a reality, but figure out what you want the world to look like that you want to live in, and what your piece or where you can contribute to bringing that world into reality for all of us. So just thank you all for all the inspiration today. I really appreciate it. So this concludes today's Nonprofit and Community Organizations panel. On behalf of CULTR and Georgia State University, I thank you all for joining us. Just